Hello and welcome to the Circling the Bases podcast. Yes, this is going to take some getting used to. We were formerly known as the Roto World Baseball Podcast, but I promise you're in the right place. My name is DJ Short, and I'm here as always with Drew Silva. And this episode is strictly a position preview episode for the 2021 season. We covered first base in our last episode, but today we're going to go over second base, all the big names, the sleepers, maybe some busts too. Before we get into that, though, remember the NBC Sports EDGE Fantasy Baseball magazine is in stores now. The online guide is live as well. Everything you need to get ready for your fantasy draft will be constantly updated throughout spring training to get you ready for your drafts. Tons of stuff on the way. Pretty exciting stuff. So you can go to NBCSportsEdge.com/MLB draft guide to get started there. But again, this is our second base episode, and I'm going to read off my top 12 in a minute here to get us started. But just in general, Drew, how are we feeling about second base? With first base, it was a little top heavy. Do we feel the same way about second base, or is it a little deeper?
I think it's super deep, but there are like landmines everywhere, if that makes sense. And it's kind of similar to last year where it's really difficult to rank a lot of them. I poured over this a lot more than I poured over my first base rankings.
Yeah.
But there's like the value to be had. This is the fun of fantasy baseball, finding guys that are ready to pop.
Yeah, there's guys that do a lot of different things that you can find different, if you're looking strictly at, NFC ADP, there's guys who can hit for pop late, there's speed late. So it's interesting. But as you're navigating your draft, you kind of fill different areas of need late, whether it's at second base or a middle infielder position. So it definitely is interesting. So I'm going to read off my top 12. Starting with DJ LeMahieu at number 1, Ozzie Albies 2, Whit Merrifield 3, 4, Brandon Lau, 5, Kevin Biggio, 6, Keston Hiura, 7, Ketel Marte, 8, Max Muncy, 9, Jose Altuve, 10, Jeff McNeil, 11, Dylan Moore is a new name for me, and 12, Mike Moustakas, hoping for a rebound there.
I think we're pretty similar. Let's start from the top. DJ LeMahieu, I guess there's a chance that he wouldn't be the top second baseman in these rankings if he had not re-signed with the Yankees.
Probably so, yeah.
But he did re-sign with them in late January for 6 years, $90 million, and it returns to the same situation that has allowed him to put up a .336 batting average and .922 OPS since the beginning of 2019. In that same span, 36 homers, 129 RBIs, 8 stolen bases, 150 runs scored in 195 games. It's just been a monster. His career batting line at Yankee Stadium, .359 average, .628 slugging percentage. Incredible numbers, and he's going to bat leadoff again in that lineup. It's kind of a situation where, go get him if you're able to.
7th most difficult player to strike out over the past 2 seasons, tops in the majors in batting average during that time. Every reason to think he's earned that. Average exit velocity is great. Even if you want to forecast, a downward trend in homers, maybe not 26 if the ball is deadened, as we talked about in our first base preview episode, but maybe 20 homers with the 300 plus average, 100 runs scored, maybe 100 RBIs again. I think that's well within reach and enough to justify him being at the top fantasy second baseman.
You had Albies too, I believe. I think we had the same top 3, LeMahieu, Albies, Merrifield.
Yes, exactly. And at Albies, I'm excited about. I think he has, if you look at the power and the speed that he can potentially bring, and just the context of the lineup there, I guess we don't know where Albies is going to hit necessarily.
Yeah.
He started out in the number 2 spot last year, if I believe, with the Braves, and ended up down the stretch hitting like 5th and 6th. We'll see. But upside wise, I think Albies has a ton. But LeMahieu's just safer for me. I wouldn't have said that a year ago with LeMahieu. I think I wasn't necessarily buying it. But I think last year he gave us, even in the short sample, all the evidence we need to put LeMahieu number 1. But with Albies, though, had that wrist issue last year, which really hampered him early on. But it was really good news to see him come back red hot in September and ended up finishing hitting 271 with 6 homers, 3 steals over 29 games. Struggled from the right side last year, which I think is interesting. Some of that could have been because of the wrist, though. And remember, the Braves brought in Chipper Jones to be a hitting consultant, assistant, whatever the title is, to join their major league staff. And, Chipper Jones are the best switch hitters of all time. That can only help the Albies going into this year. So if he's healthy, I feel like he can for sure be one of the top fantasy second basemen.
Yeah, I think he's an interesting fantasy case this year because he missed over half of the already abbreviated 2020 season with that bone bruise in his right wrist, like you mentioned, and wasn't playing very well before he went on the injured list. So the overall numbers do not look great, but like you mentioned, he turned it on in a big way once he returned to action in the second week of September. Like all of his counting stats came in September. And he was awesome in the NLCS against the Dodgers too. You look back at the strong 2019, the overall 5 category production, the fact that he's only 24 years old, I think there's a ton to like. And the big issue is where is he going to hit? They kind of settled on him. He hit 5th throughout October last season. I hope that he can climb back to the number 2 spot, which is where he batted for most of 2019. But even in the 5 hole, I think the overall 5 category production, I think the upside is tremendous.
And Ozuna coming back for the Braves just lengthens that lineup. He's going to have plenty RBI opportunities if he's there. So is he going to run as much hitting 5th? Maybe that's questionable a little bit. But I think the upside's huge there. Whit Merrifield, number 3, has an ADP of 39.60. Close to Ozzie Albies, which is 33.21, by the way. And I think we're all kind of waiting for Merrifield to slow down, but just not really happening yet. Really, really solid. 282 with 9 homers, 30 RBIs, 12 steals last season. Was caught 10 times in 30 attempts in 2019. So it was really nice to see him go 12 for 15 last year. That's basically like a 30 stolen base pace over a full season.
33, yeah.
Yeah, not saying he's necessarily going to steal 30 bases this year, but you kind of feel safer about grabbing that speed earlier, if you get him. And, best contact rate of his career last season, 9th lowest among qualified hitters, leadoff volume in a fun lineup, which we mentioned with the Royals in our first base episode. They pulled off the Andrew Benintendi trade on Thursday, potential rebound candidates. So, you're looking at that Royals lineup with Merrifield leading off, Mondesi, Santana, Sal Perez, Jorge Soler, Benintendi, Hunter Dozier. Like I kind of like all those guys as being mixed league relevant. So they're a fun little team.
Yeah, I mean, I was pretty down on Merrifield going into last season because the stolen bases had really begun to tail off, from 45 steals in 2018 down to 20 in 2019 with those 10 caught stealings, like you mentioned. But then he went out and stole 12 bases in 60 games last summer, which again is a 33 stolen base pace over a 162 game season. If he can get to 30 steals and like 15 homers with a 300 batting average and hitting leadoff in that lineup, I think he's set up to have huge success this year.
So where did you have Brandon Lau?
5.
Okay. Yeah, I thought he was just way too low for what he's done so far in his career. ADP 71.56. I think he's a stud. 181 major league games so far, 37 homers, 113 RBIs, 10 steals, 94 runs scored. Those are monster numbers, and he doesn't seem to be getting a lot of credit for that, especially last year he cut his strikeout rate, which is that was my concern going into last year, is like the batting average upside. But he cut his strikeout rate from 34.6% all the way to 25.9%, which is, fine. It's right in line with, a lot of hitters are doing these days. So the batting average was basically the same though, but things got balanced out a little bit. Had a 377 BABIP in 2019. Last year was more right around the league average, 309. Brought the strikeout rate down. I think he's going to settle right basically where he is.
Yeah, I think it's kind of dangerous to look at those StatCast player cards for such a short season. That's kind of been a trap since StatCast became a thing. But Lowe's is really fun. 98th percentile in barrel percentage, 94th percentile in expected slugging percentage, 90th percentile in expected weighted on base average, which are all great metrics. And the baseball card numbers were there too. 916 OPS, 14 home runs in 56 games, also stole 3 bases. Rays manager Kevin Cash likes to tinker with his lineups, but Lau was in the number 2 hole more often than not last year. I think we could see the full-on breakout this season. And at the ADP, I love him. I had Keston Hiura 4th, and he's actually going to play first base now with the Brewers, recently adding Colton Wong, but he's never actually played that position, even as like an amateur baseball player. So, we're ranking him here at second base, which is where he'll be across all services come draft time. Probably won't get that first base eligibility until like the second week of the season. He had 85 strikeouts in 59 games last year, which obviously is not ideal. But if you combine his first 2 major league seasons, you get an 843 OPS, 32 home runs, 81 RBIs, 12 stolen bases, 81 runs scored in 143 games. He's got that counting stats upside, I think, even through all the swing and miss issues. Maybe I would redo this and put Lau up at 4 just because we just made such a great case for him. But it's about how much stock do you put into those 2020 numbers. I think Hiura is a great fantasy asset.
I think I overlooked some of Hiura's flaws last year. I was expecting Hiura to maybe be the top fantasy second baseman coming into this year. A year ago, I think I predicted that.
We talked about that. Yep.
But in 2019, he hit 303 over 84 games, but he had a 402 BABIP with a 30.7 strikeout rate. Like, I should have saw that coming, that there would be some regression. So some of that was just like wish casting on my part. And the strikeout rate, even went up last year, 34.6%, lowest contact rate among qualified hitters. But, the power's there, some speed, multi-position eligibility. I love that ballpark that he plays into. And you can get him a little bit later, 68.07 ADP. That's not bad at all. That's after Kevin Biggio. That's kind of in the same area as Brandon Lau. There's a lot of guys in that area too, Ketel, Marte, who we'll get to in a minute. So, if you want to take a chance on a rebound, you could get him in like your sixth round pick, basically, which isn't bad at all.
What is Hiura's sprint speed like?
I'd have to look it up.
Yeah,
I don't have it on me right now.
I was trying to look it up real quick. It just seems like if you're not a good defensive second baseman, it can't be that high, right? But there's guys like Eloy Jimenez who actually has decent sprint speed and is a terrible outfielder.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just like it's more agility or instincts or just being able to like turn your hips quickly.
Yeah.
So I don't know. There's a lot that goes into defense.
Yeah, I'm looking up Keston here. His sprint speed last year was 54th percentile, which is lower than I would have thought.
I know. Is he really going to be a big stolen base threat? I need to re-examine my Hiura opinions.
That's good. You're doing it in real time.
Yeah.
So I have Kevin Biggio 5th. Where did you have him?
7. And he's going 59th overall right now.
Seems a little early. It does. He's never going to hit for average, but a huge on base guy. I'm a little skeptical about the power. Mm-hmm. There's been some discussion this week, with the deadened ball, trying to look for hitters who could be hurt by that. You look at the lowest average home run distance leaders in 2020. Kevin Biggio was 10th on that list. Colton Wong was actually at the top. David Fletcher, DJ LeMahieu, guys like that. But just Biggio being on that list, is another mark against him, potentially. Right now, he's a 4 category contributor. The speed's good, though, which is nice. He's yet to be caught stealing a base in the majors. He's 20 for 20 through 159 games, 24 homers, 76 RBIs, 107 runs scored, 26.5% strikeout rate. So if the batting average is low and like, let's say he is a 15 homer guy, like does that justify 59.11 ADP? Probably not.
I mean, was he helped by playing at AAA Buffalo last year? And are they going to be playing in Dunedin? What is it? Dunedin, Florida?
Yeah. You always need help with that.
I know, man. at the Blue Jays spring training complex.
We should have talked about that with Vlad Jr. too. Like, if they are playing in Dunedin, Florida for their home games this season, like that is a factor we're going to have to account for, and there could be some value in that.
And I would bet most likely they are going to be playing there.
Yeah, probably so. At least maybe for the first half of the season.
And also, where is Biggio going to hit? Are they going to do the second leadoff man and bat him ninth and try to turn the lineup over with George Springer hitting leadoff?
That's a good point. If Biggio's hitting ninth potentially, like that's another knock. And maybe I'm reevaluating Biggio in real time right now too.
I mean, if he's going 59th overall, I'm not going to have any shares of him.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Obviously, if you're in an OBP league, you're going to think differently.
Yeah.
About him. A points league, maybe you think a little bit differently about him. But yeah, I think it's fair to say that might be a tad bit too early.
I still like him, and for all the reasons you laid out. He gets on base. He's been a 24-20 guy through 159 major league games. There's a lot to like there, beyond like the batting average. But yeah, the power speed profile is what you want from any fantasy player. But yeah, I have a few questions about how he's being valued. I had Max Muncy 6th, so I had Cavan Biggio at 7th. Muncy's probably done playing regularly at second base with Chris Taylor or Gavin Lux filling that spot for the Dodgers, but he did make 11 starts there in 2020 and 14 at third base, so he'll have that 3-position eligibility to go along with.
Nice.
Yeah. The home run upside and the RBIs and the runs scored that he can rack up, given the lineup around him. His rate stats were bad last year, but I go back to the 203 batting average on balls in play. I think that kind of paints the picture of what happened there. They would have normalized, gotten some positive regression had the season lasted longer than 60 games. I don't know. Muncy's, he's eligible at 3 different positions, so we'll be talking about him a lot if you listen to all these episodes.
Yeah, we talked in the first base episode about the fractured ring finger. So I'm gonna give him a bit of a mulligan, especially because he actually turned things around a bit during the postseason. I think he'll be fine, and I think he's the kind of player that can really give you coverage across the board. So maybe you do take him to be your second baseman, but as you go on during your draft, you're like, hey, maybe he's better at third base for me, or whatever the case may be. So I love these multi-position eligible guys like Muncy. I have Ketel Marte 7th. Guy who broke out in 2019, hit 329, 32 homers, 92 RBIs, was just a monster. Over 144 games put up those numbers. It was fair to expect some drop off, especially with the power, but we weren't expecting just 2 homers in 45 games. Still like elite contact rate. Hit 287. No question, not what you were expecting. And just taking into account the ball maybe not being as juiced as it was, he's never going to be a 30 homer guy again. Probably, most likely, that's the outlier. But the volume, hitting for a high average, he's going to make contact. If he hits 18 to 20 homers with a high average and a few steals, that's where you set the expectation now, not to be a fantasy superstar, not to be a second or third round pick, which maybe you were thinking last year he was in that area. Now you can get him an 81.77 ADP on NFC. Like, I think that's pretty reasonable. And you also have to remember that Marte dealt with inflammation in his left wrist last year. Maybe that hampered the power a little bit too.
Yeah, wrist issues for hitters is huge. He hit more ground balls last year than he did the previous year, a lot more. But otherwise, the metrics weren't all that different, or not so different that you'd think there'd be such a disparity in production between the two seasons. And as we talked about this time last spring, he's a great contact hitter, and I don't think that has changed. You can call last year a 2-month slump affected by a wrist injury, which it all was, and Yeah, grab him at a discount. He's probably going to hit second. It helps that he's on kind of a mediocre Diamondbacks team. I think I'm higher. I think I'm more likely to get shares of him this year than I was last year.
I was into Marte last year, just didn't work out, and I had probably my worst fantasy season.
Yeah, I mean that was
for various reasons. I didn't take it personally that I was doing terribly because it was just so random and weird.
Yeah.
But yeah, this year hopefully I'll be a little smarter.
So I had Dylan Moore 9th. Where did you have him?
Nice. I had him 11th.
Okay.
And I was even uncomfortable there because
I know
he's just not as established as some of these other guys.
Yeah, I mean, this is another situation where you have to ask yourself what to make of those numbers from 2020, but this is a more positive angle with it. He had an 855 OPS with 8 home runs and 12 stolen bases in just 38 games last season for the Mariners. You extrapolate that out to 162 games, you get 35 homers and 52 steals.
Wow.
Which is obviously like not going to happen, but I mean, if you dream of him coming anywhere close to that, like, I mean, if he's a 20 homer, 30 steal guy, that's massive. I don't know exactly where he's going. I guess I could look that up.
112.81.
Yeah, that's in a smart people league at NFBC though. I wanted to check Yahoo.
Okay.
Not that Yahoo players are dumb. It's just more casual. 133 on Yahoo. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, high strikeout rate will probably, keep the average down. Like he's not going to be a big average guy. Has good but not great speed. So I temper expectations of that. Above average in terms of hard hit percentage, barrel percentage, average exit velocity. This was in a small sample last year, granted. Established himself as the number 2 hitter there for the Mariners, which is nice. So the volume's there. But Moore is the kind of guy like, if he struggles coming out of the gate, you could see his chances drying up maybe a little bit. So I think it's really important that he starts out hot and being productive. If he could be like a 15-15 guy, that's kind of where I'd set my expectations for this year, which would probably justify the ADP, honestly.
That's probably fair. Yeah, it was interesting that the Mariners, it came out that they were interested in Tommy La Stella, who kind of does what Moore does, at least. Like he plays those kind of positions. I guess Moore can play a little bit of outfield, but yeah, I'd be worried about that being a flash in the pan and then him just kind of disappearing.
Right. Yep. I have Jose Altuve at 9, and I didn't feel great about it. His ADP is 101.74, but I still put him ahead of Jeff McNeil, who I have 10th. McNeil's ADP is, maybe a round or so higher. Altuve last year, 219, which is very uncharacteristic, obviously, with 5 homers, 2 for 5 in stolen base attempts in 48 games. So just terrible. But, the postseason, he was a beast.
Yeah.
Out of nowhere, which is encouraging, the sprint speed is still good. The most alarming thing last year, and again, small sample, so I don't know how much we want to make of it, but the whiff rate, way up compared to what we've seen in the past. Wrong direction, really, for a few years now. 18.6% strikeout rate last year. It was at 13.2 as recently as 2018, so headed in the wrong direction there. The past 3 years, he's dealt with leg and knee issues, turns 31 in May, 8 stolen bases in 172 games dating back to the start of 2019. If he can't get the contact rate back to where it used to be, it's kind of a trickier situation. But I do want to give him the benefit of the doubt as far as that's concerned. I think the batting average can bounce back. He can still help in power. He's not going to be the speed guy. I still like the Astros lineup even without George Springer. It's still not as good as it was having Springer at the top, being an OBP beast, but I still think Altuve can be useful if healthy, which, you can't count on.
Yeah, I had Altuve 11th, and I didn't feel great about it. Like you said, monster in October, 439 batting average, 1403 OPS, 5 home runs, 10 RBIs, 11 runs scored in 11 games in October. I'm conveniently not counting the wild card series against the Twins because it happened in September. He was 0 for 7 in those 2 games, but yeah, even looking beyond that weird year in general, you mentioned he's 8 for 16 in stolen base attempts over the last 2 seasons. I don't think stolen bases are going to be a big part of his game moving forward. And I'm not super confident that he's going to be, the 30 homer guy that would be required to make up for the loss of the speed. So I'm going to let someone else worry about that. I doubt I'll have many shares of Altuve at all. I had Jeff McNeil 10th. I think you did too.
Yep.
Exactly. Yeah, I was disappointed in the lack of power last year after he hit 23 home runs in 2019, but he's got a career 319 batting average, 383 on base percentage, 501 slug. That's an awesome career slash line, especially for a guy who was never really a big time prospect and didn't debut until age 26. If he keeps it up, the counting stats will be there. Batting second, probably, I would assume, in front of Francisco Lindor, Pete Alonso, Conforto, Dom Smith, James McCann, J.D. Davis. I'd like to rank him higher than 10th, honestly. But again, you kind of need him to start contributing and more in the fantasy scoring categories that matter before you can really move him up.
Yeah, he's 5 for 13 in stolen base attempts in 185 games over the past 2 seasons. So I was hoping, when he first came up, he was a little more active on the base paths.
Mm-hmm.
He's just not a good base stealer. That's just not his game. So that's a mark against him. The power is just, I think it was like a 4-game span last season where he hit like basically all of his home runs. Otherwise, he didn't really hit for power at all. But he really bounced back after getting off to a slow start and, just turned back into a hitting machine. 319 hitter through 248 games. Tough to strike out. He's going to hit for average. I'm just not sure about where the power's going to land, especially if the ball is not as, bouncy as it's been the past couple of years. So maybe he's more of a 10, 15 homer guy, which is why he's 10th for me. Because if he's not stealing bases, if he's not a 20 homer guy, fantasy is just not as interesting. He's kind of one of those guys that's more valuable in real life.
Yep, totally. There's a lot of those second basemen that are a little bit more valuable in real life.
Totally, yeah.
I had Tommy Edmond 12. He was a big letdown last year. I know Matthew Pouliot was really high on him, but that was before COVID happened. And the Cardinals got hit pretty bad with COVID. So I excuse a lot of their numbers in general. But yes, Edmund was still a big letdown last year after his great rookie year in 2019. But if you combine those 2 seasons, you get 147 games, so close to a full season, a 283 batting average, 786 OPS, 16 home runs, 17 stolen bases. That's pretty good for a guy that's going to go pretty late. That's with moving all around the diamond defensively, and now he's locked into the starting second base job and probably also the leadoff spot ahead of Paul Goldschmidt, Nolan Arenado, Dylan Carlson, Paul DeYoung. I think a little more comfort in just having a set role could get him back near that 2019 form. That's a narrative, of course, but he was in the 95th percentile in sprint speed last year among all major leaguers. I don't expect a ton of power, but I think he can reach 25 steals and maybe like inch toward 20 home runs, probably closer to 15. And hopefully a ton of runs scored if he's hitting leadoff. That's not bad for, the 13th second baseman off the board in NFC and Yahoo leagues right now, which you are usually a bit more casual. He's going as the 15th second baseman off the board. That's sneaky value if you're playing in a league with a middle infield spot. I'd love to be able to plug Edmond in there.
Edmund was just 2 for 6 in stolen base attempts last year, which kind of surprised me as I was doing the research here, especially with that sprint speed. And I think he might go undervalued for that reason because we know how fast he is. Getting that volume at the top of the Cardinals lineup, I think that's huge. He was 13th for me, so just outside of my top 12. I had Mike Moustakas 12th, and he was banged up last year. But, a full season in Cincinnati, assuming they don't trade him or whatever, he could hit 30-plus homers. Not going to be a big batting average guy, but, a power bat you can get in middle rounds, 122.42 ADP. I think he'll be fine. Hits plenty of fly balls. We loved Moustakas going into last year, and, I'm not going to ignore him at this point. One comparison I wanted to make is Edmond and Andres Jimenez, because I have Jimenez 14th. We'll get into more like the sleeper deep round guys now. Jimenez has an ADP of 182.26. Of course, was traded from the Mets to the Indians and the Francisco Lindor deal during the offseason. Jimenez came up as a 21-year-old last year, and I was really impressed with him. Kind of held his own offensively, wasn't great by any means, hit 263, 3 homers, 732 OPS. But he was mostly a speed play. He was 8 for 9 in stolen base attempts. And excellent sprint speed to boot. I think there's a lot more upside there as far as that's concerned. I think the question with the Indians, though, is like, where are all these guys going to play? Because they brought back Cesar Hernandez. Ahmed Rosario came over in the same trade with Jimenez. There's been some speculation about maybe the Indians send Jimenez down to suppress his service time. I really doubt that is going to happen. I think Jimenez will play shortstop, and Rosario is more of like a roving utility guy. Possibly, there's been talk about,
or they trade him this spring.
Yeah, there's been some talk about that too. The Reds being interested in Rosario, but there's also been talk in the past of Rosario playing the outfield. So maybe the Indians try that because they need outfield help. But if Jimenez is there every day, I think he could steal 25 plus bags, and that's why I have him here at 14th for me.
Yeah, I had Jimenez 16. I'm surprised how we're matching up on these kind of later guys, but I had Nick Solak at 14.
I have him 15th. So again, we're high of mind.
I think he's like a sneaky, super fast dude.
Yeah, he is.
I think you can count on a good number of stolen bases. He was 91st percentile in sprint speed last year, and I think we're going to see more power than he showed in 2020. He hit 27 home runs in 115 games at AAA in 2019. I think he's like a sleeper breakout candidate at age 26 with, hopefully a decent lineup spot on a not very good Rangers team. They do have some power bats in there too that could kind of aid him as like if he's batting second or something.
Yeah. I see John Birdie as like kind of similar. Speed you can get late. He's competing for the second base job. The top prospect, Jazz Chisholm, and Isan Diaz, who's, has some interesting pop and speed, but like can't make any contact at all. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Birdie run away with that job and, end up stealing a ton of bases and being a nice value late. But like you were saying with Solak, he's super fast. I think over a full season, assuming he gets a full allotment of at bats, he could be a 15-15 guy with a decent batting average. And, where he's going 168.63 ADP, that's pretty good.
Yeah. And Birdie, like you mentioned, 329 ADP right now on Yahoo, at least. It's a little early for those leagues, but if you're looking for speed late, 27 steals in 116 career major league games, 99 of those starts. I think he's sneaky value in an era where it's hard to find steals, especially late. I had Jake Cronenworth 15th. He was really good last year, finished second to Brewers reliever Devon Williams in the NL Rookie of the Year voting, 285 batting average, 831 OPS, played really good defense at a variety of positions, but only 4 homers and 3 steals in 54 games, and was never a huge counting stats compiler in the minors, definitely not in the power department. I kind of think he's one of those second basemen that's just a better real-life player than a fantasy player, sort of like Nick Madrigal of the White Sox.
Right.
Who's also kind of in this area on my list, but I don't know, Cronenworth as a multi-position guy with eligibility at shortstop and third base, I believe. There's reason for intrigue there. I think there's just lots of true talent, and at some point, like these guys sort of figure it out at the major league level. He's not a guy I'm going to be like super happy to target this year, but I really like him as a player.
Scott Kingery, I think, is kind of interesting just because no one's going to be paying attention to him this year.
Yeah.
Had a nightmare 2020 season, came down with COVID. I think you could throw out everything he did last year. Now, Gene Segura is going to play second base for the Phillies this year. They brought back Didi Gregorius. Alec Baum will play third. So the best chance for playing time for Kingery is probably center field. I think there's a decent chance he could be the primary guy there. Pop and speed you can get for next to nothing. I think he's worth watching. Gavin Lux, kind of a mystery, what kind of role he's going to have, but we know the potential's there. I don't know. Like, do the Dodgers like Gavin Lux? Like, what's the deal there?
I don't know. There was something going on last year that like I don't know, like he wasn't ready or something.
Right.
But we'll see. I mean, yeah, the upper minors numbers are crazy. In 2019, Lux between AA and AAA had a 347 batting average, 1028 OPS, 26 homers, 10 steals in 113 games. It's going to happen at some point, but I feel like they trust Chris Taylor more. Enrique Hernandez is gone at least to steal some of those second base reps,
and he's kind of interesting too, from a power perspective in Boston.
I know
that ballpark and that lineup, which I still like. The other AL East ballparks, he can be pretty sneaky late, qualified, at multiple positions. Colton Wong, I'm a little, he was at the top of the list with like the lowest average home run distance, but probably maybe leading off for the Brewers and, good home ballpark. He's shown some pop and speed in the past. Like he could be a pretty nice late value as not a starting second baseman, but a middle infielder type.
I agree. A career 308, 373, 482 hitter at Miller Park / American Family Field now, where he'll be playing half of his games, 29 steals over the last 2 years. I think he has a chance to set a new career high for homers, which I think is 12, so it wouldn't be that hard to do. I like him as a middle infield type in those kind of leagues. Brendan Rodgers, I don't think I wouldn't recommend drafting him, but he's been on the radar. He's been a top 50 prospect for 5 years in a row. Kind of crazy. Like, you usually don't last that long on prospect lists, usually graduate, but his development got thrown off by a labrum tear in his shoulder. He's supposed to be back to full health now. The recent reports have been pretty good, and I think he'll have an opportunity to claim a starting job on the Rockies infield in the wake of the Nolan Arenado trade. I think Ryan McMahon probably moves to third base, so second base should be open.
Yeah, McMahon's decent enough too. I mean, anybody who gets a full-time gig at Coors Field is relevant. I don't think he's like a great hitter by any means, but just volume there at Coors Field. His home run distance is actually pretty high too. Yeah. So there's some legit power in there. So he's someone to watch too in kind of this area too.
Rodgers batted 350 with a 1035 OPS and 160 plate appearances at AAA Albuquerque in 2019. He looked like a future star not long ago. We've been talking about him forever, going in the 400s in NFC drafts. So I think a waiver wire consideration if it gets late in the spring, and it seems like he's going to be the starting second baseman.
Jonathan Scope is another guy you can get super late who for some reason just continues to go overlooked and is a pretty steady contributor. Yeah. So he's someone who could get super late as a middle infielder. We could probably go on forever with some of these guys, but
I want David Fletcher, another just guy who's probably better in real life than fantasy, but I think he's going to bat leadoff in front of Trout and Rendon and our breakout candidate Jared Walsh. Tommy La Stella too, 289 batting average, 827 OPS, 21 home runs in 135 games since the beginning of 2019. Leadoff candidate for the Giants, at least against right-handers. There's just a lot of depth at second base.
Prospect that I need to mention here, probably the most obvious one, Vidal Bruhan with the Rays. 23 years old. He's been in the Rays farm system forever. He actually signed with them in 2014, which is a really long time ago. He was a teenager back then. Switch hitter. Didn't really hit for much power, when he initially started his pro career. He's added that a little bit, but the thing to watch with Bruhan is the speed. 151 stolen bases over 399 games in the minors. Hasn't been very good against left-handed pitching, but it's easy to imagine him coming up and the Rays playing to his strengths. They have a way of doing that, moving pieces around and putting hitters in positions to succeed. And Bruhan has mostly played second base or shortstop in the minors. I expect second base would maybe be where he would fit. I think he played some outfield in winter ball, so maybe the Rays are trying to get a look at him there too to see if they can move him around a little bit. But I think we'll see Bruhan at some point this year. And if you want a speed play, I mean, there's a perfect one for you. It's just playing time is what we'll have to watch with him.
Speaking of speed plays, being the resident Mets fan of the podcast, what are they going to do with Jonathan VR?
I don't know. Like I was kind of thinking maybe they'll make JD Davis more of like a platoon player, and Davis will play against lefties, and they'll move Jeff McNeil to third base against righties and play VR at second base there. Maybe they give VR some exposure in center field and move Nimmo over to left if there's the DH. I think the thing that they want to have is just some versatility
and depth.
And that's basically, what he does. So I think they're just guarding against all sorts of possibilities. I don't think the Mets are sold on JD Davis as their third baseman. So I think they're looking at all kinds of ways to move people around.
I think they're going to wind up with Chris Bryant. We're recording this on in early to mid-February, I should say.
But yeah, I wouldn't be drafting VR.
Yeah, I know
highly this year, just because I don't think he's going to play a ton. He's going to play a decent amount, but not something that would justify a draft pick in a standard mixed league.
Yeah, I've loved him in the past. Like anyone that has owned him probably, or has rostered him probably feels the same way.
So I think that's all I got for second base.
I mean, we could talk about Starlin Castro or the Twins situation, like Luis Arias or Jorge Polanco, Hanser Alberto with the Royals.
Yeah. I mean, all these guys are viable middle infielder guys. There is depth here, which is quality. But yeah, I think we could talk for another 20 minutes about that, but we won't. We're gonna wrap it up here, cut it off here. For our listeners' benefit. But our next episode will be shortstop. We'll cover that coming on Friday for our next episode. So keep an eye out for that. If you like what you're hearing with this show, Circling the Bases, remember the name. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please rate and review if you don't mind. We would really appreciate that. Follow us on Twitter if you don't already. I'm at DJ Short. Drew is at Drew Silva. Be safe out there, and we will see you next time.